on the planet. But the forms, that was the forms. The forms were using the story of Annie Besant and thought forms to speak about today. So what stories do we use to tell stories with? I used theosophy to tell the story of our relationship with the virtual now in this digital revolution. In order to tell other stories, and in fact, for example, it's all about changing the stories, you know. I mean, why I wanted to talk about the mother question and mother hating, which is a characteristic of the digital age, mother hating, is because because we can change certain stories, you know, tell them differently. Like, how many people know the story of Medea, the woman who, in my tradition, you know, which is Mediterranean tradition, according to Euripides, she killed her 2 children out of jealousy because Jason, first she married Jason and helped him become king. He was going after the golden fleece with the Argonauts, and he wanted to be king. She fell in love with him, and she kills or helps to her father to die in order to give the power to Jason. And then Jason falls in love with a young girl, and she kills the children. This is used by Euripides and by most society, patriarchal society, to tell the story of how women are uterine, you know, they're too like connected to their uterus, and they just go crazy, and they would even kill their children. And it's also the story of how deep pain, it's used as a metaphor to say how deep pain can produce cruelty. So, you know, Hitler was abused as a child and becomes Hitler, that kind of explanation. That's what we use the Medea myth for. But Medea, if you read the Metamorphoses of Ovidio, Medea is a whole other, much more complicated figure, and she gives life as much as she takes life. You know, Jason asks her once, my father is old and he's dying. Oh, please take my life, because she's a magician. She's a maga. Take my life and give my life to my father. And she says, no, Jason, I will do more. I will give your father's life, and also you can keep your life. So then she makes a compost. She flies over all the hills of Attica and all of Greece. From one hill she takes one plant, from another hill she takes another leaf, from another hill she takes, you know, some dead serpents, from another she takes some worms, and she flies and flies and flies, and then she goes back home and she makes the potion, makes it, and then there's this event where she puts Jason's father to sleep, and she takes all his blood out and puts this potion in the body. So it's basically a narrative of an early transfusion, like a blood transfusion. Probably there was some techniques in ancient Greece to do some sort of blood transfusion, and people didn't always die or something like this. But this is a story that is just as important as the one of the killing the children. So if you see the killing of the children in relation, you see that she's talking about a kind of more complex sense of time and duration of life. And so we need to tell the stories differently. You know, when Trump just the other day was supporting the corporations that produce artificial milk, you know, it's a return to the 70s. And if you look at when the artificial milk was distributed mostly, it's the same period when cybernetics are developing, the whole first era of cybernetics. And now in the second era, again, it's this attack on what you can't seem to control so easily because of the fact that you can unplug, you see, because if the homunculus is not the robot AI, but it's in the body, you know, it's the child, you can unplug it. And so, I mean, you can just not eat, you can kill the child. So it's this, I think, desire to take over this power that is creating the problem. So Annie Besant is very interesting, and the thought forms are very interesting in this. Did it answer your question? What's the part that I didn't answer? I'll try to. Well, I'm telling you this story of Medea. I did answer that question. I'm telling that. There's also other people, you know, the good thing about feminists is that they always quote their predecessors, which somehow, for some reason, I noticed doesn't always happen in other fields. But, you know, it's not just me reading Ovidio. It's also Christa Wolf writing the Medea from a different perspective in the 80s, the novel by Christa Wolf. And it's also Toni Morrison in Beloved, where she tells the story of the the slave woman who kills her children so that they don't have to grow up being beaten as slaves in America, in the US. So there are many, many stories behind this story of telling the story of Medea differently. But it has much to do with what we are talking about, because it has to do with removing in a threeing way this problem of the so-called crisis of the environment, and basically not seeing the question of the crisis of the environment and the Anthropocene as separate from the question of the digital revolution, but to entangle them and see what happens. That story. Well, there's one more story I'm working on, but I can't tell you now. It's about eternity. That's important.
Bueno, gracias por venir. Acá finaliza el primer módulo del día de hoy. El segundo módulo comienza a las 15 horas, así que les pedimos que estén 10 minutos antes. Si se quedan a almorzar, tienen el bar que queda en el edificio de Figueroa Alcorta, que van por la playa de estacionamiento, suben las escaleras y llegan. Tienen wiwi, y si no, tienen en el cuarto piso el restaurante Food. Nada más, muchas gracias. Ah, perdón. Y los invitamos para ver la película de Pierre Hugh, Untitled Human Mask, que está en la sala contigua.